Yo, how's it going everybody? You got Sketch here, and welcome back to the channel. On this episode, we're looking at the final entry of the Silent Hill franchise to be developed by Team Silent, and this one admittedly took years for me to circle back and finish. The differences between this and their flagship titles was a change of pace, while still having a lot of those shocking and jaw-dropping moments with its gameplay and narrative. Today, we're checking out Silent Hill 4, The Room, developed by Team Silent and published by Konami, released to the Xbox, PS2, and PC in 2004. This was developed alongside Silent Hill 3 and makes some bold choices with its gameplay and narrative, causing it to be an outlier in the 4 original games. But before banging on too much more, let's check out the story. Henry Townsend wakes up from a nightmare to discover himself locked in his apartment. A report about a serial killer spree comes over the radio as he looks towards the door to see it chained up with a note saying, "Don't go out." Looking around the apartment, he finds a large hole in the bathroom wall which transports him to a different plane of existence. There are more questions than answers, and now a wave of homicides are piling up around him as he looks for a way out. Gameplay-wise, you've got a 3D, first-person and third-person survival horror game where you'll navigate through the nightmarescape of Silent Hill and its numerous portals around the city of Ashfield. You'll meet several inhabitants along the way, many of which become victims of Walter Sullivan. For comparison's sake, if you're familiar with the movie Doom Generation, Henry's encounters with others often end with a horrible demise coming to the new acquaintances at the hands of Walter's spirit. As it continues, numbers appear on each victim that will eventually unravel Walter's motive of performing the 21 sacraments. You'll move through the game in a more survival action-based entry compared to the first 3 Silent Hill games, as the puzzles are somewhat scarce. You'll need to get various items, clues, and keys to move through the game while avoiding all the hellish hazards of the other world. You'll have a few weapons like the pipes, bats, golf clubs, handguns, and taser, and the taser is capable of dropping enemies in one tap, and will be a good one to hang on to especially later in the game. The combat has a few more options like Silent Hill 3, as you can now see the strength of your melee attack as you charge it, and the health is now displayed on screen. You now have to manage your items with a limit of 10 that you can carry at a time, including weapons and resources. You can go back to your apartment to save and have a safe space for a while, but eventually even the safe room becomes overrun by evil. You can move through the apartment in first person and can observe things around the city and in your building, which is how you'll discover paths to each area. Going into each world will change back to third person, but you do come back to your apartment at the end as one of the latter sections of the game. You can also circle strafe while fighting enemies, but some of your weapons can break like the golf clubs. This is also the first time your character doesn't have a flashlight or radio to signal enemies being nearby. Enemies will constantly have the drop on you at points in the game, and keeping enough health, lethal, and key items is a balancing act you'll have to figure out or repeatedly perish. Corporeal enemies are going to come in a lot of varieties like dogs and knife-wielding nurses, and soon morph into more bizarre things like wheelchairs that mercilessly slam into your shins. The twin victims are a new enemy type to be in the series, and these things are terrifying, especially when you see them for the first time in the water prison. There is also a very strong set of foes in the game, and these are the Ghosts. Ghosts are a large part of Silent Hill 4, and they will haunt your ass into the Shadow Realm unless you do a few things. There's a limited item called the Sword of Obedience, and only this will suspend ghosts that will otherwise chase you through the entire game after your first encounter with them. Silver bullets will also work as stopping power for ghosts, but are even more limited to being 2 in the entire game. The ghosts will eventually follow you back into your apartment and haunt items in your spot unless you bring back holy candles and pendants to cleanse your space. You can still save while your apartment is haunted, but you will take damage when you're near possessed items. The second half of the game also becomes a long escort mission where your neighbor Eileen Galvin joins you after narrowly escaping Walter's attempt at adding to the sacraments. This is where your inventory becomes shared for certain weapons. Eileen also can't climb ladders due to the cast on her arm, so you have to either make paths accessible for her or regroup with her later. Thing here is that Eileen can't necessarily die in combat, but the more damage she takes, the more possessed she will become as the game goes on. You can partly tell how possessed she has become by her skin pulsating and her dialogue becoming more unhinged. Eileen can serve that work when you get surrounded by enemies, and equipping her with the chain whip honestly looks hilarious when you see her standing on business. You have to keep her close by, as that will also add to her possession level, so it becomes important to protect her and to stay near to get the better endings. This part of the game introduces adult Walter Sullivan pursuing you in addition to several ghosts if you don't suspend them, and with just one being lethal potentially, dealing with 6 others is not advised unless you really want that challenge. There are also only 2 boss encounters in the entire game, which is different compared to earlier games. Nearly every main area had one of some sort. One is you have to battle a room full of enemies similar to the Hangman encounter from Silent Hill 2, but add about a dozen of them. The object here is to hit the correct one to reveal the exit. The second and final battle is with the Conjurer, where you have to throw spears into his chest while Walter Sullivan tries to stop you, leading to a duel with him as a mortal. These encounters are not the most difficult the series has ever seen, but they are random enough to where you'll need to figure out strategies for them since this part is timed. This encounter also directly affects the ending if Eileen is sacrificed or not, and that possession level mentioned earlier will dictate how fast she walks towards her potential demise. Graphics-wise, Silent Hill 4 was developed using a proprietary engine used for the PS2, and this entry functioned a bit differently with its first-person segments, and is similar to previous entries on the hardware where you can at times recenter the camera. The camera does have a few fixed angles, but is mostly free roaming as you search around each of the 5 main areas. You'll venture through the subway world, forest, hospital, water prison, and building world, and then backtrack through these again with Eileen. While this was developed alongside Silent Hill 3, it has a similar look graphically, with the more seamless transitions between cutscenes and the gameplay. The visual filters you'll see, like the film grain and crimson washes on screen, are dynamic seen before, but also done with good effect here. The aesthetic has the Japanese horror film like films like Ringu, better known in the West as The Ring, especially when moving between the portals of the apartment in Ashfield. The graphics from the characters are a bit more cartoonish with sometimes malformed citizens of Ashfield, but enemies have a similar look to the models you would see in the prior entries. With the game's first-person segments, it puts you into the early concepts of first-person horror experiences as you watch the safe space become increasingly more hostile. Being able to look around at an active world is also interesting when you can see just how much detail is actually unfolding, as the voyeur aspect does play into the puzzles you'll need to find clues in the environment and in your apartment. It's a neat additional layer to this entry that would later be revisited and the concept of the delisted yet coveted PT demo. You'll eventually break into the other world as it takes the form of your apartment building, and each of these areas has a fair bit of verticality to them, and the building world especially is a multi-tier area where you have to go through numerous floors to get to the exit. When you get back to the apartment, you'll find some interesting items in your neighbor's apartments, and even a few Silent Hill Easter eggs like the weapon room filled with models of previous weapons seen in the series. The enemies are pretty gnarly here, even though there is not too many of them. The twin victims and patients are scary enough on their own, but when you see a group of the gumheads, which look like decomposing primates, those are straight up frightening. And when they quickly mob you, the sounds they make are things of nightmares as they give chase. The ghosts are the biggest threat, and also the most varied, as there are 11 unique types, 10 of which that will pursue you if you don't use the Sword of Obedience on them. These are the most intimidating looking enemies next to the twin victims, and when they come through the walls to chase you, it certainly creates tension during the run. As mentioned earlier, for every scary looking enemy that you have, then you see ones like the wheelchairs that just have it out for your shins. Overall, the enemy variety is good, even when the earlier entries were a bit more creative. The environments will really set the tone here with some truly mind-bending areas like the water prison. This section and the building world are the standouts here with the apartment once you visit it. There are some off-the-wall areas here, especially when you get to the room that is Eileen's giant disembodied head, whose eyes track you as you move. While Silent Hill 3 has more groundbreaking set pieces, this does have some locales that are equally as gnarly at points. Sound-wise, the room is pretty solid in a lot of areas and a bit weaker in some, but is overall decent. The soundtrack has Akira Yamaoka doing double duty as producer of this entry, as well as returning composer, and delivers a lot of variety as one would expect. You get those guitar-laden tracks similar to Silent Hill 3's opening and interludes, alongside down-tempo grooves when exposition and suspense are building in the narrative. There are some great tunes in here that have a heavy mix of psychedelic rock and trip-hop in parts, adding on to that ominous nature of Silent Hill, and as expected, bangs. The dialogue is all over the place, with each character having a substantial amount of voice lines. Henry may not be the most exciting character ever, but those around him compensate for his neutral demeanor, especially as the backstory of Walter Sullivan develops in-game. The radio chatter and news reports you'll hear going back and forth between portals will seem disjointed at first, but once it all comes together, it becomes a story that's more about the villain than its heroes. Is it the peak of Silent Hill lore or performances? Maybe not, but it's still an engaging story that has some significant reveals. The sound effects work does hit a few snags, with several stock sounds being used in some of the actions in game. The sound effects when hitting a lot of the enemies is a stock roar heard in a lot of old horror films and cartoons. What's funnier though is the patience when they get hit and burp upon impact. It's even funnier when they fall down a set of stairs and burp on each step they hit. The squeak of the wheelchairs as they attack is also just funny to hear, and it's not all bad though, considering you still have a lot of the same sounds from past entries, like the familiar chime when you pick up items, and also the same sound bites for opening most doors. The room's audio work does have some questionable choices with the effects, but for each of the flaws, there's more hits than misses. This has some good things going, and also has a few missteps, which luckily don't heavily detract from the experience, though it can be an immersion breaker for some. The soundtrack is great, the dialogue is mostly good, and the sound effects are mostly decent. Typically, Silent Hill games crush across the board, but hey, I guess they can't all be home runs. Silent Hill 4 The Room is an interesting case and the swan song of the original development team for the series. It's crazy to think that moving forward, the franchise wouldn't have a Japanese development team again until the newest release, Silent Hill F. While this entry is a polarizing one amongst fans, it's certainly not a bad game, just often not a favorite entry, especially stacked against the first three. This is interesting since it develops the villain more than the protagonist, and there are some twisted and shocking visuals pretty early into the game. The gameplay has a familiar feel to the first 3 entries, and despite the item limitation and backtracking, it never quite gets to the points of being egregious. The escort mission aspect of it is different for the series, but since Eileen can defend herself, it's fun to watch her while she's in combat despite not being able to climb ladders. It's a change from the other entries, but is overall a solid entry, even though it might not be quite as good as its predecessors. Silent Hill 4: The Room gets an 8 out of 10 and comes recommended to horror game fans, even if it's not as scary or mind-bending as the past entries. It does have some good stuff in there as Team Silent's last game. While it's not my favorite entry in the series, I'm still glad to have circled back to it all these years later and finished it. It does make some changes to the mechanics, but none of which really broke the experience. And the escort half of the game is also a change for the series, but as long as you have weapons for your partner, they can hold their own well enough. The ghost can be a pain to deal with, but if you use most or all of the swords, you can keep them off your back for the most part. This much like the prior entries are getting to be expensive pickups for the PS2, with loose discs going for about $115 and complete copies going for about $170. The Xbox version is a bit cheaper, however, with loose discs going for about $44 and $68 for complete copies. This is also available on the PC through services like GOG. This entry never made it to any compilations, but it's fairly accessible outside of the PS2 version. If you're into survival horror games or the Silent Hill series in general, it's worth the look, but the mileage may vary from person to person. If you're looking for something to play during the spooky season, this isn't a bad one to land on, so if you're interested in this one, play it however you can. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. If you find these videos helpful, that's awesome, glad to use it as a resource. Check back often, we'll have more reviews and commentaries come up in the near future. But until then, take it easy and stay safe out there. I'll see you on the next one.